Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Athens City Council. Today is January 22nd, 2018. We will be entering into a special session this evening, beginning with ordinances for second reading. I am acting as President Pro Tem this evening, and President Knisley is our current acting mayor. Welcome, everyone. Ordinances for second reading. 03-18, an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an LPA state project agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation for bridge painting on US 50 and declaring an emergency, introduced by Councilmember Katsas. Ordinance 04-18. An ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an LPA state project agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation for landslide repair on US 50 and declaring an emergency. And the pause is if there's any comments or questions. Ordinance 05-18, an ordinance to ensure local match funds for the Mobility Manager Grant. This too is introduced by Councilmember Katsas. Any questions or comments? Ordinance 06-18, an ordinance authorizing the purchase of 3 buses and a truck for the Athens transit system and declaring an emergency, introduced by Councilmember Katsas. Ordinance 07-18, an ordinance affirming the plan of operation and governance for the SOPEC electricity aggregation program and declaring an emergency, introduced by all members of council.
Mr. President Pro Tem?
Yep.
It's the next one.
The next one?
The ballot issue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Forgive me.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councilmember Reisner. Ordinance 09-18, an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title 9, General Regulations, Chapter 9.06, Intoxicating Liquors, Narcotics, Section 9.06.12, Hallucinogen, Possession or Use Unlawful, and Section 9.06.15, Drug Abuse, introduced by all members of council. Any questions or comments?
This one?
No.
Ordinance 10-18, an ordinance amending the 2018 appropriation ordinance, introduced by Councilmember Reisner. Ordinance 11-18, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an economic development revolving loan fund administration agreement with the Ohio Development Services Agency and declaring an emergency, introduced by Councilmember Reisner. Any questions or comments? Ordinance 12-18, an ordinance authorizing the purchase of softening salt for the water treatment plant, introduced by Councilmember Butler. Questions or comments? Ordinance 13-18, an ordinance authorizing the purchase of a new backhoe for the Department of Engineering and Public Works, EPW, and disposal of the current backhoe as a trade-in, introduced by Councilmember Butler. Questions or comments? Ordinance 14-18, an ordinance authorizing all actions necessary to effect an opt-out retail solar community program in the city of Athens through the Southeast Ohio Public Energy Council, otherwise known as SOPEC, charge SOPEC retail electric customers in the city an electric carbon fee, directing the Board of Elections of Athens County to conduct the election, and declaring an emergency. Questions or comments? And I do believe we have someone to speak this evening on this issue, perhaps.
I'd like to make a motion to amend this ordinance.
Second.
And I think we have an expert here to explain why we need to make such an amendment.
Thank you.
And just as an overview, what it is correcting the title that was referred to, because our original language said retail solar community program in the city of Athens. And in conversations with Director Eddie Smith, he clarified that retail customers does not refer to retail stores or businesses, but it would include both residential and small commercial electric customers. And so we, the law director and myself, worked with Mr. Smith to correct that language so that it's going to be a solar community program. Will be then retail would be, is that?
It's going to be community
solar
program.
Community solar. So we're taking out the word retail in the title, moving solar to after the word community everywhere that it appeared in the document. And Mr. Smith, you might have some additional comments to help us with that. Yes, please.
Thank you. Presenting is Executive Director of SOPAC, Eddie Smith. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Butler and Acting Mayor Nisley. Yeah, we're really excited to be discussing this with Council and potentially having it on the ballot for this upcoming election cycle. To be clear to all voters and Council members here, retail is a term of art in the electric industry. It refers to all customers in the city who would be eligible to purchase energy in the retail market. Again, as Acting Mayor Nisley pointed out, it does not refer in any way to retail outlets or the type of business a particular utility customer might be engaged in. So retail is the same word there that we used in the electric aggregation ordinance and in the natural gas ordinance. Both those ballot measures passed overwhelmingly in the city of Athens. So I think voters understand pretty well what they're dealing with there.
Thank you.
That's all I have. I don't know if there's any questions.
No.
Anyone on council care to question or clarify?
No.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. So we do have a motion to amend and a second. We've heard some logic why. All those in favor of adopting the motion to amend, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. The motion has been amended and now read for the first time. Thank you. Moving on to ordinances for first reading. Ordinance 15-18. An ordinance authorizing an interfund transfer, and this is introduced by Councilmember Reisner.
Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem. Let me read the ordinance. Section 1, the auditor is hereby authorized to make the following interfund transfer from Water Fund 740 to Water Debt Fund 744. The amount is $71,400. It's been read for the first time.
And I believe as well, too, there's a request from the auditor's office.
Okay. I move that we suspend the rules.
Second.
Yeah.
Thank you, Auditor Hecht.
I apologize for this one. This is a debt payment to cover debt payments in the water fund. OWDA payments are taken out of our bank account on January 1st and July 1st. And so this slipped by us at the end of the year as far as moving that money into the water debt fund, which is where our any debt payments are paid out of a debt fund. There's plenty of money in the water fund, but it has to be transferred into the water debt fund. The $71,400 will cover the next payment in July also. Right now we need about $35,000 in there so that we don't end up with a negative in our expense report at the end of the month. So it's really a bookkeeping item. I appreciate if you will suspend it. It's been many, many years since we had a negative in one of our expense accounts. So Andy has piped in on the emails and will help us remember next year to get this taken care of at the end of the year. But it comes out at 12/01, January 1st, and at the end of the year with everything that's going on, it's easy to forget that money has to be transferred. In the sewer fund, we automatically put money in the debt fund, so we don't really have to worry about this when those payments are just taken out of our account. Any other questions?
No. Thank you, Auditor Heck. Any other questions, comments? We do have a motion to suspend and a second. Ordinance 15-18. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The ordinance is now suspended.
I make a motion to adopt 1518.
Second?
Time is of the essence.
Thank you. Any questions or comments before we vote? In the audience, none? Thank you, Auditor Hecht, again for the explanation. We have a motion to adopt Ordinance 15-18 and a second. All those in favor of adopting the ordinance, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The ordinance has been adopted. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to announcements and other business. Before we proceed with ordinance, announcements and other business? Yes.
Pro Tem Butler?
Yes, Councilman.
I think I have something pertinent at this time. So basically, this hit my my mailbox tonight, and just for clarification, it's my old-fashioned paper mailbox. This was an exchange between DeJuan Hammonds from Ohio Department of Natural Resources and Jessica Dine, basically clarifying that the grant that we suspended the rules to apply for last week, the Clean Ohio Trails Fund for the Columbus Road trailhead, the project does not fit the grant.
Okay.
So, coming February 5th, we will be changing the legislation to switch over to the Recreational Trails Program. The applications are identical, but we just need to revise the legislation, so we'll see that coming up at the beginning of February.
Thank you, Councilmember Katsas. Questions or comments? As well as we're on announcements of other business too, I believe we're looking for a motion to remove the ordinance that was tabled.
I'd like to make a motion to remove from the table Ordinance 0818.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. You may proceed.
Now that the ordinance has been removed from the table, technically this would be a second reading, but at this point I'd like to make a motion to amend 0818.
And let me apologize, I should probably read it first. An ordinance amending the Athens City Code to establish Title 49 initiative petitions introduced by all council members. And I believe, again, thank you, Councilmember Reisner is addressing this. So you may proceed, sir.
The reason for the amendment is that when this ordinance was first introduced, the correct citizens' initiatives documents for it to be attached and placed into the new Titles 49 were not correct, but the proper copies now have been secured and have been included within the ordinance, and we are ready to proceed with it.
Thank you. We do have a motion, but I believe we're still needing a second to amend Ordinance 08-18. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Anything from Acting Mayor? No. Okay, thank you. All those in favor of amending Ordinance 08-18, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you. The ordinance has been amended and now read for the first time. Thank you, everyone. That completes our special session, and we now move on to our committee meetings for the evening. We do have 4 committee meetings this evening. We have Finance and Personnel, City Safety and Services, followed by Transportation Committee, and a Committee of the Whole. We begin this evening of committee meetings with Finance and Personnel, which is being chaired this evening by Councilmember Reisner.
Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem. Appropriations is the only item we have under Finance and Personnel. We have the auditor here to, excuse me, to speak on this. If you'd be so kind.
I've asked for 2 appropriations tonight. new ones to start through. One is for $3,450 in parking enforcement refund line. We received an overpayment right at the end of the year from OU. They brought a new computer software system online in December, and a payment to us for parking for a project was paid 3 times. So this is the amount that we need to refund them, but we don't typically have big refunds in parking enforcement. I think the actual budget that we put in at the end of the year was maybe $500, because we're usually refunding $10, $20 parking tickets and things like that. So we need that additional money. That will come out of the general fund, and the money is available for appropriation. The other appropriation I'm asking for is in 582, the Armory Hudson Fund. Pretty small fund, not a lot going on there. However, we do need money in the TC 300s to pay the electric bills for those 2 buildings. So we're asking for $2,000 for that one.
Thank you, Auditor.
Could I ask, will there be any urgency about paying that bill, the electric bill?
That one, we actually have received that bill, and that's how we noticed when we went in and looked to do that. I don't think it's due until February. So neither one of these would actually be, come before council until February 5th, I believe, is your Monday. And I talked to people at OU and told them it would take a little bit. So it'd be nice to pass them at least in February, but I don't know that it's necessary you suspend on first reading unless we just want to get them taken care of.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Reisner. And thank you, Auditor Hecht. Moving on to City and Safety Services Committee, chaired by Councilmember Butler. What a wonderful introduction. This evening, we just have one bullet point, talking point, and that is in discussing with Andy Stone, our Director of Public Works. He's acknowledged that there is a U.S. EPA grant deadline, which is coming up in March the 15th, exactly. Beware the Ides of March. And this is for a $100,000 U.S. EPA grant to address possible stormwater improvement runoff projects within the city. A couple ideas would be to address maybe stream restoration, either at Tulane or Coates Run, or to address improvements at Stimson Avenue in the future with upcoming projects there. So again, there's essential upcoming deadline, and this is just authorizing them to proceed with the application process. Any questions or comments? That completes the City Service Safety Committee, which then moves us forward to Transportation Committee, which is chaired by Councilmember Katsas.
President Pro Tem Butler, thank you. And it seems like our City Engineer Andy Stone has been busy, because I have a similar grant that he is looking to seek, and this one is for the Small Cities Grant. Application deadline is March 1st. This is a this would be for roadway improvements, and he is targeting the West Union area, mostly beyond the fairgrounds, going out to the 56-682 intersection. Is that correct? 682? I always get 682 and 681 mixed up. Because the deadline is so early in the year, they haven't really pinpointed exactly what they want to do in this area. Mostly, the big thing though is pavement and safety improvements is what they're seeking to do. And as Andy Stone explained to me, basically this grant scores on a point system, and so some of those points that you score highly on are bad pavement, congestion, crashes. Those things, if those are present, sometimes you score higher and have a better chance of receiving. So that's why they identified that West Union area as being a potential candidate. The grant fund is funded at 95%, and Andy Stone stressed that since we probably only have a few years left to apply for small cities, because this grant is only available to cities less than 25,000, and he believes that by the 2020 census that we will be larger than that. He feels remiss not attempting to achieve a grant proposal every time it comes available. Do you have any questions? Oh, and since the grant deadline's on the March 1st, we will be able to get 2 reads on this. The city is going to ask for suspension on that second read in the middle of February.
Any questions or comments? Yes, Councilmember.
Okay, just to make sure that I understand that, how much is the grant? And I believe you said a 95% coverage. The city would only pay 5%. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. And so the amount that they're applying for has not been determined. They know that the pot is $10 million, with a maximum allotted of $2 million per project. But the grantees definitely stress that you should probably apply for less than $2 million, because you're probably not going to see 20% of the pot going to one project.
I see. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Many of us also recently were on tour with the Ohio University Board of Trustees, in which Director Stone acknowledged this particular project and funding, and other ideas also include access points and access roads to help relieve congestion near the parks and near the fairgrounds. That was something else that was addressed, and potential turn lanes on some of this, I think maybe on Union, to assist again with making the community safer. Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The second bullet point that we have under Transportation Committee is the vending draft ordinance. So I will turn the floor over to Member McGee, who's been doing the heavy lifting on this one.
Thank you, Member Casas. And I do have hopefully a summary of the proposed changes for the vendor ordinance, which will be put up. Okay. Some of you may have noticed that the 10 parking spaces that border the College Green and have the signs on them indicating that they are vendor spaces. They've been unused for a period of time, and I attribute this for the past 2 months basically due to the fact that OU has been in recess and the fact that we have bad weather from time to time. So as I had indicated on the summary, that we have a bit of a conflict in interests in Athens. One, we have the conflict of the need of the vendors for reserved spots, and I think that's an absolute need. I think that's something that is, since we do have vendors, and I think having vendors in the city of Athens is a very good thing. I think allowing them to have reserved spots is a good way of maintaining their business, and definitely a good opportunity for everybody. On the other hand, we have the need of the public for the uptown parking spots, and this becomes particularly acute for some of the businesses in the uptown area, such as Little Professor and some of the other businesses where there's really very little quick access parking. I know I've received a number of complaints from both citizens who wanted to park so they could purchase items or to do some quick business, and the store owners in that area when there are no spaces. So what I have tried to do is to balance out the competing interests. And currently, as I say, the vendors currently pay a yearly fee for the reservation of a parking space, which is granted from 4 a.m. until 4 p.m. That yearly fee covers their the same cost that they would be paying if they paid the meter for the time period that they're actually using it. We had something come up about Sundays, but we'll be discussing that since there is no charge for Sunday parking. So they pay this yearly fee, and it's a pretty steep fee. It's $1,500, and I think that causes a bit of a hardship for some of the vendors. So what I've tried to do is to do a enticement to them to lower the fees to a monthly process. So they would pay $125 per month for the monthly fee to have the reservation of a parking space. And that's the key to it, that the space would still be reserved for them during the time period they're paying the monthly fee. During the 3 winter months, which would, I've indicated basically, which would be December, January, and February, and primarily because OU goes on break December 15th, and I noticed this year in a special, there were very few vendors out there from the end of November through December 15th. We had a few nice days, and I'll grant that there were a few vendors out during that time. But during those 3 months, I would basically propose that the vendors be permitted to pay just the meters and not pay any kind of monthly fee. In exchange for that, they would basically not have a reservation during those 3 months. So they'd have to get there in time to reserve their space in order to assist them in that we currently have a section in the code that prohibits them from leaving their space, and what I would do is to give them 3 hours to basically be absent from their cart or their truck or whatever. So if they get it there on time, they should be able to have the space, and then if they have stuff to do or come back, they would still have that space, and they would be paying by the meter rather than a monthly fee. I think, you know, for those vendors who would not be doing any business at all during those 3 months due to the weather, if we have a long period of bad weather, I mean, that basically saves them $375 out of the $1,500 fee that they currently pay. Another thing that I would be doing is to allow an option similar to this for the summertime. And when I spoke to some vendors, they said they sometimes will vend elsewhere during the summertime, and everyone recognizes that the number of students is cut down drastically, and business does fall somewhat, but at least the weather is good, so it's offset somewhat. So I wanted to give the vendors an option for the 3 months in the summer, May, June, and July, since OU breaks in May, that if they wanted to kind of give up their reservation and go to meters, they could do that. And so they could judge how much money they were making and how much business they were having or losing. And if they had a place elsewhere, they wouldn't be basically paying, you know, 2 costs during the time period. So what I've attempted to do in doing that is to say that they would have a one-time they could exercise that option during each year. They would have to do it before the first of the year, and they would notify code enforcement that they wanted to exercise that option. They could exercise it May 1st, or at least the day before May 1st, or June 1st, the day before, or July 1st, any time during that time period. The only thing is if they exercise it, it stays through the time period that they would be exercising the option. So it could be as long as 3 months. It could save them money. Again, potentially, if they have a kind of business where they're not making a whole lot in the summer, I mean, technically, they could save basically $600 in or more in the cost of the licensing fees. So that was the one proposal there, that they would have that option. Again, there would be no reserved spaces if they exercise that option. And I do want to emphasize this, that if they exercise that option, they can still pay the meters. Another thing I would be doing in the ordinance would be to make it clear that there would be no reservations for anyone on Sundays. And I make that proposal because the parking meters are free for people on Sundays, and I noticed there's very little vendor activity on Sundays. So if a vendor wants to vend there, there's absolutely no reason why they can't. They just have to get the parking space in time set up, and if there's going to be some activity in Athens and they want to see if they can make some money on that, more power to them. They don't have to pay any meters. But on the other hand, if we have a situation like we had during, I believe it was Dad's weekend at OU at the end of November, when nobody was vending and all the cars were driving around past these 10 empty spaces, this would avoid that kind of situation. So at least hopefully it would. I would ask that the vendor spots be reduced from 10 to 8. I believe that when I spoke to the head of code enforcement last, we had, I think it was only 3 vendors who had actually paid the fee for the year so far. We've never had actually 10 spots taken, I believe. And this ordinance would also provide that if the 8 spots are not full, if vendors have not obtained licenses for all 8 spots, then the signs for that particular spot would be either covered or removed during the time period that that space would be available. We don't have that currently. We currently have just 10 spots set aside, and signs are there and nobody can park there, and people are afraid of being towed. So that would do that. Another thing that I put in there to assist the vendors too is that I've heard some complaints about my proposal saying basically they're afraid that they would have a difficulty getting in and out of spaces. And I recognize that that is a difficulty. So I included in the ordinance the proposition that the mayor would be able to assign the vendor spots, the parking spots. Currently there's 10 spots lined up on one side of Court Street, and when I look at the possibilities, I think it could be rearranged quite easily to provide much easier access for the vendors. If, for instance, there's a disability spot that if it could be moved in between 2 of the vendor spots, it would free up them for easy access, and at the same time it would still remain there for use for as a disabled spot. So there are ways to do that, and I'm sure the mayor could accommodate the vendors, and I think he should. Again, in 5 there, the signs would be removed during the winter months or covered during the winter months, those 3 months, to indicate that they would not be reserved spots during that time. And I would anticipate as now, even with the heavy snow we had, I did notice some people were parking there in the evenings pulling up, and they might be sticking out a little bit. But in bad weather, those spots are premium for people who have to do quick chores in Athens or need a quick spot. So I believe this would serve the purpose. And finally, the very last part that I was actually concerned with was to protect the existing vendors who currently have a license. And what I've included, and even though there are minor changes in parts of the ordinance, the current ordinance that is, what this would do would be to allow them to have a preference, the current vendors, if they pay by January 1st, if they pay the first month. So this would be pay for the month of March if they pay it by January 1st, and for no reason they've had any reason to have their license either waived or revoked or anything. So I think it would protect the current vendors that way. I do have a provision in there that if somebody is not exercising their license, that if they don't exercise it for 4 months, that the code enforcement officer is to contact them and give them notice that they will be considered to have waived their license if they don't vend within 30 days. So they would have to start vending within 30 days. That would basically cover a situation where you might have somebody who doesn't vend at all during the winter months, and then for the month of March doesn't vend as well at all, hasn't paid the license fee for March. And then he gets a notice from the code, so he or she would actually have till April that if they had not started vending and had not paid their fee, that they would possibly be considered to waive that fee. So if there's anybody else in line for, say, number 9 spot, they would then step up to the 8th spot. So I've tried to deal with a lot of potential problems on this. I believe the ordinance bears careful reading, and I believe it's fair to both the public, the general public who needs parking spaces, and to the vendors who I believe have a very difficult business situation in Athens, and it's becoming increasingly difficult, and I recognize that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I appreciate your thorough research and description of the proposal. It's obvious you've done some homework.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Comments or questions? Yes, Councilmember.
I had a quick comment, is that not only would they pay per hour, but they also would be having a variance for the 2-hour parking also. So that has to go.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So that can't fall out because that's one variance that they need to include, even if they only pay by month.
Absolutely, I think that goes without saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reisner, followed by Councilmember Kroll.
Your ordinance doesn't deal with this, but it's a question I've always had, is why do we restrict the vendors just to that one street and not allow them other places to do their business, places that may have more foot traffic and potentially more business for them? Why do we segregate them there? And not that I expect you to know the answer, but it's a rhetorical question.
Right. If I might respond, though, briefly, I did talk to the vendors about that, and several of them expressed a real concern with that, and that some of them wanted the option to move further down in the evening. I know there's a kind of a conflict between some of the established restaurants and where the vendors could be located. My preference would be to allow them to move outside the area that's currently set aside for them. However, I didn't believe it was appropriate to raise that at this time.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Crown.
I also appreciate Member McGee's work on this. I think it's an issue that can be improved for sure. I had a number of questions regarding some of the language in the proposed ordinance that you mentioned about evidence of ceased vending or how we determine active vendors. Is that something the Code Enforcement Office would be tasked with? How would we determine?
Well, that's a very good question, because especially if somebody is doing the meter vending, or at least not paying the first 3 months during the winter, actually the first 2 months of the year during the winter months, if they're not paying it, we're assuming that they're actually not vending, but perhaps they are vending. But if they have some evidence that they are vending, that would certainly be worthwhile. But I would say that code enforcement should certainly be checking on it before they send a notice out to see if. And one way to do that is certainly ask the other vendors who are there, have they seen anyone vending during this time period, this particular vendor? I think some of the vendors are quite stand out, such as I think we have like an iPhone repair vendor. That's the kind of thing that if anyone has seen that person for a long period of time, that would stand out. And we don't have that many vendors. We only have, I think, 6 or 7 carts out there at any one time.
Another question I had, I know that the garbage fund gets a percentage of the vending licenses. Is that going to negatively impact that fund if there will be fewer fees collected through this new proposal? Will that negatively impact the operation of the garbage? I don't know.
I think the garbage fund is very well off.
It's
putting it
sweet.
mildly.
It's a healthy fund.
Yeah, yeah.
I also noticed that the ordinance specifically calls out Halloween as a special circumstance. Is that the only, I realize Halloween is very special, no doubt about that, but is that the only weekend that this ordinance should actually call out?
Well, that's an interesting question too. When the, I know during the International Street Fair this last year, they had taken that area and put a bandstand up there. That would be about the only time I could see that there'd be a real interference with the vendor locations. I don't know where they'll put the bandstand this year, but I had taken that particular section from the current ordinance that deals with the Halloween situation. So, but I think that would be about the only one that would definitely stand out.
Thank you.
Any further questions from council? I believe we do have some public comment. Anyone else from council? No. Any public comment? Thank you for your patience. Yes, thank you. If you could identify your name.
Certainly. My name's Damon Crane. I live in the 4th Ward of Athens. I own and operate a hot potato food truck, which I've had out on East Union there for the last year and a half. I have a lot of thoughts on this. I'm not sure how many of them it makes sense to share tonight. So I was wondering if, I'm a little unclear about how this ordinance would progress from this point to, if passed, being passed. So this isn't a first reading of it, correct?
Correct. This is committee. This is a discussion of the proposed ordinance. So,
and if it moved forward, the next step would be a first reading, then there would be 3 readings and would be voted on at that point?
and at any point during any one of those 3 readings, public input is welcome.
Okay, thank you. That gives me a much clearer idea. I guess a couple of things I wanted to point out. As a vendor, I'm not opposed to public parking. Councilmember McGee mentioned that businesses in that area need customer parking. I'm a business in that area. I need customer parking. The easier time my customers who drive have finding a parking spot, the more food I can sell. I'm much like the bookstores in that respect. And I live in Athens. I've lived here for a dozen years. I know how difficult it can be to find parking and how frustrating that can be. But I do agree that there obviously is a conflict between parking and vending spaces. The more vending spaces we have, the fewer spaces we have for public parking. It's the same conflict that exists with business loading zones, with motorcycle parking, with handicap parking, with movie theater parking, with bus stops. What am I forgetting here? I think there's at least one more type, taxi parking. So I think, we need to weigh the benefits for local residents of having vendors against the benefits of those particular spots being available for public parking. And I think before we do that, I think we also need to recognize that mobile vending in Athens has already lost substantial ground to public parking. A decade before I opened my food truck, I worked for 3 years at the Burrito Buggy. And that was prior to the ordinance that was passed in 2013, which I guess is the last time that the city really revised the way it handles mobile vending. And back in those days, when we were on the opposite side of East Union Street, the vending spots were only reserved for vending throughout the day, round the clock. When the current ordinance was passed and things were moved across the street, that time for reserve vending was cut by 2/3. It was accepting time when no one could be parked there for street cleaning. It went from about 21 hours a day down to about 7 per day. And I know the way the current signs read, it says from 4 a.m. to 4 p.m., but the way the current ordinance reads, if I understand correctly, you cannot serve before either 7 or 7:30. I think I'd have to double check on that. So the spots really aren't reserved for vendors to do business for 12 hours. They're currently reserved for about 7 hours. So that was a big loss for mobile vending. Now, of course, the city increased the number of spots at that point available for mobile vending. All of that increase has been offset by the new spots that were added when the revitalization project of that block of Union Street post-fire was completed. So we start from a point where Vending has already lost substantial ground to public parking in Athens. And Councilmember McGee's proposal would further reduce Vending. It would reduce the number of spots available for Vending by 20%. It would reduce the amount of time the remaining spots are reserved for Vending by 25%. So these are substantial reductions in Vending on top of how it's already been reduced in the city. And I want to point out that saying that the spots aren't reserved, but vendors can still show up and feed the meters, that doesn't really work. Vending doesn't work without reserved spots for vending. It's a business based on perishable food items. I can't spend 2 hours in the morning, preparing food, preparing my truck to come out at my commissary space, drive uptown and not have a spot to vend because someone's already parked there. You can't run a food business that way. It doesn't work. And on top of that, if someone's in my spot, where else can I park? We only have 10 spots available to vendors, but each spot right now, as the ordinance is written, is assigned to one vendor and one vendor only. Can I park in someone else's spot and hope they don't show up? What happens if they do? I can't serve from any other spot in town. And most of the parking spaces in this town don't accommodate vending equipment either. One of the reasons why I think it does make sense to limit vending to particular areas is that currently the ordinance allows for vending units that are up to 20 feet long. That's the exact length of most parking spots in this town. The vending spots were extended to 22 feet to accommodate vendors. My truck is 19 feet 11 inches long. I bought it with Athens' ordinance in mind and built it. I converted it into a kitchen with the current ordinance in mind too. You can't park a 20-foot long vehicle in a 20-foot long spot. That doesn't work. So I think there are a lot of things that would really make the changes that Councilmember McGee has proposed unworkable for vendors. It would likely put some people out of business. It would certainly cause other people to take a big hit in their business. And so I think that we need to weigh the benefits, and I'm not sure, I don't want to go over time either. As I said, there's a whole lot to talk about. I don't want to put it all out there tonight. But how much time do I have left?
Well, I actually didn't start the clock on you.
Oh, okay.
Well, you also offer a very unique perspective, which I think is terribly helpful. So if you have another point or two, we can accommodate that, and then we can proceed. But and I applaud the dialogue because it's very important for us to hear.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I guess I'll just try to weigh some of the relative merits of public parking versus vending. So if I park my food truck in one of those spots, or if I park my car in the same spot and feed the meter, the city gets the same amount of money from the vendor's fee that it would get from people feeding the meter, more or less. I mean, we can quibble about, well, are those meters, is somebody parked in that meter all the time? How much money does the city make from tickets? But more or less, it's that $1,500 a year from the hours that vending is reserved is roughly equivalent to what the city would get from orders in the meters. But if my food truck is there, I can serve 50 people on a good day. The truck being in that spot provides me with a livelihood. It provides a couple employees with part-time income. And then on top of the fee that I pay to the city, I do business that I then pay income tax on to the city. That creates additional revenue that goes to fund city services that many more people enjoy than just those who eat food from my truck. If it's my car parked there instead, how many people does my car feed? Who does it provide a livelihood for? Or part-time income? What additional tax revenue does it generate for the city? How does it provide additional support for public services? So I really think there's no comparison. I mean, in terms of both revenue for the city in and of itself, and then also the service that's provided to local residents, it's better to have a vendor in one of those spots than it is to just have that spot be available for public parking. And I mean, I think there are ways that we could change the current ordinance that would be better for everyone. But I think a lot of some elements of this I'm not necessarily opposed to, but if you want to look at the net effect being a reduction in vending, I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think that's the better choice for Athens to make. I mean, I'm not aware of any national magazines that publish top 10 lists of the best places in America to find ample parking. But, twice this past fall, USA Today reported on our local food and beverage scene, our local independent, diverse, thriving food and beverage scene. Mobile vending plays a really important role in that it enables smaller, newer, independent operators to enter the market. I mean, it sets the bar much lower. For instance, last July, I think it was, the Athens News published an article on 4 prime commercial spaces in town that were sitting vacant that the landlords were trying to find tenants for. 3 of those were uptown, one's on the Near East Side. 6 months later, all of those spots, to my knowledge, are still vacant. One of them's been vacant for a year. The reason for that, it's no mystery, the landlords are asking more in rent than my business grosses in a month. So never mind making a profit, food costs, operating costs, employee costs, I don't sell enough food to pay the rent. So it's not a viable option. Who is that a viable option for? Well, it's a viable option for McDonald's, for Starbucks, for Panera Bread, for high-volume, cookie-cutter corporate chains that every new OU student and their parents are already customers of back home. And so, we don't support the development of our local food and beverage scene, for which Athens is nationally renowned, by making it harder for new independent local operators to enter the market. And so mobile vending really does provide a way to support that development of our community. And so if we reduce the options for mobile vendors, we have a harder time promoting that aspect of our community. So those are, I think, the main thoughts I wanted to add right now. I'm happy to answer questions if anyone has any.
And thank you for offering that perspective. Again, I think it's valuable, it's informative, and it's necessary for us to be on the receiving end of that. I will pause briefly just to see if there are questions. Thank you. Councilman Reisner.
I'm impressed with your testimony there. I think the crux of this whole conversation has been, during the winter, those 10 spots are empty. And I haven't heard you address that problem. That is it's a problem. Mm-hmm. They're empty. They're not generating any revenue whatsoever, other than the fees that you've already paid. Mm-hmm. So, what would be your suggestion? What could we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a real problem. Again, I have customers complain that why can't they park right next to me when somebody's not there? So I understand that. I think we're kind of in a unique situation right now in that we've had some crazy, awful winter weather, which is one reason why folks haven't been out there. I was out there this time last year every day of the week. The burrito buggy was out there this time last year every day of the week. The cold snap took out some of my equipment that I'm currently replacing. The folks at the Buggy and OMG ended up opening brick and mortar places that they've got to focus on right now. So I think that what we're seeing right now is very much an atypical situation, that there wouldn't be anybody out there. But it is usually the case that there are fewer people there in the winter months, and certainly over OU's break, it's not uncommon to see all of those spots vacant. I think there are things that would make it better for parking without making it worse for vendors, but would create additional costs for the city. And I'm not sure if it would be, personally, I would much rather have code inspectors inspecting student rental property for safety issues than checking on those spots up there. But I think that I do like Councilmember McGee's suggestion of trying to do things on a monthly basis. And if it was the case, for instance, that any vendor could choose to take a month off, they wouldn't register their spot, they wouldn't register their fee, everybody else could move up in line, whatever spot or spots were available at the end of the line, the signs could be taken down for, those could revert back to public parking. I think that would be fine. It would place a greater administrative burden on the code office. They'd have to be checking with everybody every month, sending people up there to remove and put signs back up. But I think that would be, and again, I'm only one vendor. We do have different issues. We have different business models. We have different vending equipment. I don't think that I necessarily speak for everyone, but personally, I wouldn't have a problem with that. My customers would have more parking places. That's fine with me. I think that one of the issues that would have to be taken into account is seniority. I mean, there are folks vending there who have been doing it since the mid-'80s, and the way the order of assignment works is that starting at the intersection of Court and Union, the folks with most seniority get the first spot, the next spot. So if somebody chose to vacate their spot, would they lose their place in line? Maybe they could do it up to a few months without risking losing their place in line. I think that issue of seniority, out of fairness to the vendors, and particularly the folks who've been there a lot longer than me, I think that would need to be addressed. But I think it could be addressed if we switch to the monthly scenario that Councilmember McGee has proposed. Personally, I have no objection to those spots not being reserved on Sundays. I'm not aware of any vendor who regularly does business on Sundays, or I don't know if I've ever done business personally on a Sunday. I don't see any reason why that couldn't be available to public parking. But at the same time, I still have that concern where, you know, even if there were a few reasons to want to use a spot Sunday, knowing that if the spot isn't reserved, you can't depend on it being there, would really mean that vendors are giving up more ground to public parking after they've already lost so much ground. So it does still make me a little uneasy, but thus far, not being able to vend on Sundays wouldn't impact me. It would require new signage, and there wouldn't be more money coming into the parking meters to pay for those signs, since nobody's charged for parking on Sundays, but I don't think I would have a problem with it, one way or the other. Did that address?
Yes.
Again, I have so many thoughts on this. I kind of
Right.
Yeah.
No,
And thank you. I appreciate the input on both sides here. I do think we should continue to proceed with the agenda this evening. And I'm sure, again, Councilmember McGee is hearing what's being said, and nothing has been determined. So it's just committee.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for the opportunity to speak. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Thank you.
For being
Thank
here.
you.
I'm thinking that maybe this is going to come back for another committee meeting because of the input and the mayor's not here. Are you ready to go like non-Monday with the?
Well, I prepared the ordinance. It can always be amended if it looked like the council or the public felt that certain sections should be amended. I think it's important to get it out so that
It's
people
just-
can see how it is right now.
During council meeting, we don't have as much time to interact and to ask questions and answer. So I think that I would probably suggest that it come for another committee meeting before it comes. I mean, unless, because there's no, is there a time constraint that you're concerned about?
The proposed ordinance as it is would basically say if somebody has paid their fee for the year to date, that they would, if we pass this ordinance, they would have the option then of saying that they would like a refund for the money that they've paid up to the time of passage of the ordinance. So as a practical matter, it doesn't affect a whole lot there. It would possibly cost the vendors a little more if it's continued further and they're not using the space during that time.
And it's up to you because it's your committee. So.
I would say if any other council members feel as you do that you want to have more discussion on it, you know, I'd have no problems with bringing it up for another
Right.
committee meeting.
I think sometimes with these more complicated ordinances, they come out in the first meeting, and then people start asking questions, and then they contact us. And if we bring it up for a first reading, we can't go back into the meat of it because there's more constraint on questions and such, so.
I think,
Your balancing act will be then, if you wanted a March 1 start date,
Right.
then, and I hear what you're saying, the possibility for more discussion, but if you want the March 1 start date, and if you start with a reading by the third meeting in February, then you would have to suspend
Right.
after one reading and probably declare and have an emergency clause on it, so. Anyway.
But we would have to be doing that anyway, because our next meeting is the 5th.
5th of February, it would allow, if you had a first reading on the 5th and then a second, and you amended, then you would have correct. If there would be a need to amend, then you'd have the first reading again, then it would have been read for the first time on the 5th, and then the third meeting in February would be the second reading, at which point you would have to suspend. Yeah. So.
yes, Councilmember Grace.
I wonder about getting input from code enforcement or city administration regarding sort of the nitty-gritty details of the enforcement and the workload. Like, I feel that our code office does handle a lot of work in the city, and wonder about increasing their workload to a monthly monitoring versus just an annual issuance of permits.
Thank you.
So that would be an issue I would like to hear more about from other perspectives.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Councilmember.
I should add that I've already met once with the mayor and with the code enforcement office in regards to this, and I'm more than happy before the meeting next Monday to make an effort to meet with them as well. I know the mayor's out of town right now. I assume he's going to be back before next Monday, and hopefully he'd have a few minutes to express his concern on it. We did have a brief conversation where he indicated that he had read it, and I was pleased to see that he had read it. However, it's been amended since then, and I have sent copies to all the appropriate offices.
And to clarify, thank you, I'll acknowledge here and for those in the audience as well as TV land, we will not be meeting next Monday because it's the 5th Monday of the month. So that's what Acting Mayor Naizu was alluding to, is that we would next be meeting on the 5th of February, which is that first Monday in February, followed then by the 12th. So there is some time for us to reflect and or have further discussion of how to proceed.
That being the case, I think in response to Councilmember Fall's suggestion, I think at this point in time I'd prefer to leave it on the agenda for the first reading at the next Monday meeting, and then take the opportunity to meet with the administration and code enforcement and get their intake on it as well, so I could see if any amendments might need presented at that point in time. And as always, we welcome the opportunity to hear from the citizens as well. So,
thank you. So thank you, and for clarifying. And so if there is more input, again, this is not the sole entity, be-all, end-all. Email is acceptable as well. Whether it's people present this evening or those, again, out in TV land, please keep us appraised of your thoughts and ideas. Thank you. Does that conclude?
We were done, yes. Thank you.
Transportation, thank you.
Yep.
Moving to our last committee of the evening, it is Committee of the Whole, and this is presented by Councilmember Fall. Thank you.
Thank you. Tonight, I'm going to discuss another resolution that will be coming before council, once again, like the other resolutions we've passed, because we don't necessarily have the ability to make ordinances per what the topic is about, but we do have a right to establish our concerns and our voice. This particular issue is the village of Piketon, where the Piketon diffusion gas plant, which was used in Department of Defense and Department of Energy bomb making and other nefarious things that had to do with a lot of poisons and uranium, has asked other communities in southern Ohio, southeast Ohio and southwest, to weigh in on their concerns about the EPA saying that they are going to store the toxic waste that is being cleaned up at the plant on site as a permanent waste storage option. The village of Piketon is very concerned about this. They've felt that the EPA hasn't been as honest of a broker through this process. The village has been ignored for a lot of time during this process, from the point where the department, the EPA said that they're going to, and the Department of Energy, store on site this toxic waste to today. And I think that's why they've called out to communities for help, for passing a resolution in support of their ability to be able to protect their home and their safety and welfare. They have several issues. One of the major issues is that they don't think that the village, that the site and the proposed actual site of the waste dump does not fulfill the Toxic Substance Control Act, which some people may know because that's one of the controlling act for toxic waste that frac waste has been exempt from. So this is an issue that could also affect us. They had a consultant come in to look at ground structure and terrain. They found that there's fractures in the bedrock right underneath where they want to do the waste dump, which the Department of Energy and the EPA did not disclose when they did public meetings on it. The dump is also less than 2 miles away from a school, and it's 1,000 feet away from residences. Jeez. The other thing that they're very concerned about, besides not having DOE and the EPA be honest brokers in this process, is also the erosion of home rule being ignored, and also their future, because for a considerable amount of time when there was funding issues and stuff for the Piketon cleanup, the city, the village, and the area surrounding has gone through a process of identifying that site as a potential future economic development site. It's a huge brownfield, basically. And if you can get the brownfield can be brought up to specs so that you can have it as an economic development zone. And this area, as we all know, needs economic development more than other areas. They have high opioid economics and stuff. This basically makes their village known as a toxic waste site. Nobody is going to do any economic development in there. And I think for us, we have similar concerns when we talk about injection wells. This is another example of the southern Ohio being used as a waste site for the Midwest. And whether it's injection fluids or, in this case, toxic radioactive waste, this is an issue because economic development's not going to happen if you're known as the toxic waste capital of the Midwest. And if we can't make sure that our communities are safe and healthy, and the welfare of the citizens are just completely bowled over by federal or state regulators saying, well, just don't worry. So I call it the don't worry little lady syndrome. You kind of get like, don't worry your head. We'll just do it all and you'll just love it. And they're saying help. So I'm going to bring a resolution. I will work with Debbie writing the specific words and stuff. So questions, concerns?
Any
That's the end
questions,
of-
comments?
No, thank you.
Okay.
And
Thank you,
thank you for
Councilmember
moving
Fall,
it forward.
for bringing that to our attention as well as passionately expressing those environmental and public needs and concerns. Thank you. That concludes our committees for the evening. Thank you everyone that was present. Good night to all and enjoy your evening. Be safe out there.